In this section today, we are going to talk about the third parties or minor parties and how they play a role in the American two-party system. Of course, they are super important to maintaining the two-party system, which seems to be contrary to what we would think. We would think, well, if there's a two-party system, then the minor parties don't even matter. However, it's super important that we have these minor parties due to the fact that many of our new and innovative ideas come out of third-party movements. Even though they have little chance of taking over power in America, they have a lot of original ideas, and they often begin in the minor parties, and they begin to gain acceptance from the major parties. So they will try to figure out a way that they might be able to get their agenda toward the new president or to the new party. We saw this happen really with the Green Party that was started by Ralph Nader back in the 90s, that he was able to gain enough support to get his name out on the national stage, but not enough to win the presidency. But today, as we look at the modern Democratic Party, they have adopted a lot of the Green Party platform into their social structure and into the way that they are trying to promote for their way of governing. And so those new and innovative ideas often come from non-traditional minor parties, and these approaches can solve problems that the major parties may not be looking at, or they may solve problems that the major parties have not been able to come up with a good solution. And so therefore, we will definitely look to those minor parties to innovate new ideas. The minor parties also play the role of spoiler. In very close elections, the third parties often can take support away from one of the major party candidates, and it can change the outcome of the election. Go back and look at 1912. This is exactly what happened with the Republicans when William Howard Taft was running for president. And if you remember that Theodore Roosevelt was the president before him, he had taken over for William McKinley after McKinley's assassination. And so Theodore Roosevelt had served a partial term, and then he served a full term on his own. And then when it got time to declare for the next election, he decided that to remain with the precedent that George Washington had set, he would not run for another term in office. Even though technically he had only been elected once, he wasn't sure, and it was a kind of a gray area. He decided to step aside. He appointed for his replacement to be William Howard Taft. Of course, had to go through the election and all that stuff, and he did get elected because he had Roosevelt's support. Well, Taft did not follow through on Roosevelt's ideas as president, and so therefore, when it came around in 1912, Roosevelt said, "I'm back." And the Republicans said, "Thank you, but we already have our guy." Roosevelt was so upset about this that he decided to go out and form his own party called the Progressive Party, or the Bull Moose Party, and that took enough voters away from the Republicans to make William Howard Taft lose the election, and Roosevelt lost the election, and it gave the presidency to the Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson. And in all other circumstances, with it had one of the two Republicans dropped out of the race, Woodrow Wilson would have not become president during that year. But we all know that we can't go back and change history. Woodrow Wilson leads us through World War I and tries to set up the terms of peace at the end of World War I. That's a discussion for another day. But the parties play the part of a safety valve as well. Because of the fact that we are a two-party system, it could get very frustrating if your viewpoints are not brought up by any of the major parties. And so in some other countries in the world that don't have a third party or don't have a small party, a minor party system, there is no other option but to revolt against those major parties. And so by having these small minor parties, it allows you to be able to leave your major party and go find one that you more closely align with, hopefully avoiding any major confrontation or revolution or any sort of outrage of violence that could happen. And so it's meant to relieve some of the pressure there. As we break down these minor parties into categories, each one of them generally fit into one of these four groupings. Either they are an ideological party, which these parties have a single set of beliefs under which all the issues would fall. And so you might look at the Communist Party and understand that, well, their main goal is to have government control of the economy, government control of the businesses, and so therefore any other question that came about regarding their government would fall under those categories. The Socialist Party and Libertarian Party I'll also have up there as examples that those would be ideological parties because it fits under a broader picture of what they're trying to accomplish. We also have single issue parties, and these parties are going to focus on one single public policy. An example of this would be the Free Soil Party, in which they were trying to oppose the expansion of slavery back in the 1840s and 50s. They didn't want to see slavery expand into the new territories. They're focused on one thing. So this can't really answer the question of how are we going to deal with international trade or how are we going to deal with foreign policy. It is essentially focused on one key idea. We also could group them into the economic protest parties. Because of the fact that our country goes through economic ebb and flow, and there are times where the economy is doing really well, there are other times where the economy is doing very poorly. There have been times in history in which we have seen political parties jump to the forefront or jump out of the background that are focused on reforming our economy, and that is their primary focus. And the reason why we may not put this into a single issue party is due to the fact that economic protest parties generally have multiple facets to their platform. It's not just one issue like a single issue party would be. And so we kind of put them in their own little category here, calling them economic protest party. The problem with these parties is the fact that their support tends to fade when the economy improves. Nobody really needs them anymore. And so when the economy is doing well, you're not going to hear much about them. But when the economy does poorly, then now people are really focused on that single issue and the way that they're going to fix that. I shouldn't say single issue because they're not really a single issue party, but they focus on the economy. Now the last one here is the splinter party. Now splinter parties are just like they sound. They break off from the major parties. So go back and look at the diagram that I gave you in class or is available to you on Canvas that shows all of the political parties through American history. And you'll see that there are several shoots that jump out from the major parties, and those are what we're talking about here. These are where they break off from the major parties, typically due to the result of some sort of issue that they have a major disagreement in which they cannot settle among the major parties. Usually it involves a strong leader. I use the example of Theodore Roosevelt in 1912, and this again would be one of the prime examples of a splinter party. He goes and forms the Progressive Party, which lasts only during that one election and that one campaign, and then it falls off the charts when Theodore Roosevelt is no longer leading the charge. So these tend to not last very long, but they are an important part of the categorization of the minor parties. As we begin to look at how these parties are organized, we're primarily focused here on the two major parties, the Democrat and the Republican parties. However, it could apply to some of the minor parties as well. As we break them apart into different components, the party apparatus is the group of people that are going to be leading the political party. These are the people who are going to be organizing all of the major events. They often include employees. They will often include the donors and anybody that is heavily involved in putting together these major events of the political party. Most of the time, they are focused on recruiting and assisting the candidates in between elections. And they're going to try to start searching out for the next guy or the next girl who will be a presidential candidate or a candidate for Congress. And that's a big part of what they do. Their main focus, their main job is to work in the party. The biggest group in the components of the political party is the electorate. The electorate are the voters. These are those who are supporting the party, but they're not going to participate in any other way. Most people would say that this is where they would fall. There's the party who is actually in the government. These are the people who are elected, or they're appointed, and they're actively serving in the government. And so we have members of the Republican Party and members of the Democratic Party who are currently serving in those positions. So the political parties each have a headquarters. That is their center of power. They have a city, they have a building, a location that provides them a central office in which That happens on both the state level and the local level, and even on the national level. But there's not a great connection between the three. So the national, let's use a Democratic Party, for example. The National Democratic Party may have a different agenda, a different idea than what the city of Lafayette may have in their Democratic Party. Now, they're going to have similar ideas on the broad scale of things, but as far as actually making a platform, they may be very different in their ideas. And there's not a lot of communication that happens between the local, state, and the national level until we get around to a presidential election year. However, the party that's in leadership tends to be more united than the party that is out of leadership. So let's use the presidency, for example. And right now, if we were to have a Republican in the White House, then the Republicans, generally speaking, would be more organized due to the fact that they have more resources available. The president is a clear leader, clear man by which they rally around, and everybody looks to as setting the example. But in the opposing party, they're not going to have that visual leader to help guide their party, and so they tend to be less organized during that time. These parties could become very powerful in and of themselves if they were not decentralized, and so federalism naturally provides a way to decentralize those because of the fact that we now have our government split among national or federal and state levels and local levels. And the same thing happens with the political parties. They tend to be split up and divided among the national, state, and local levels. And so they don't gain as much power as what they perhaps could in another system. During the nomination process, it tends to lead to inner struggles within the party, just fighting for the nomination or fighting for that job. And so because of that, it tends to lead to more disorganization or decentralization because of the fact that you have people who just don't get along, or they see the bigger picture. They might get along just to get somebody elected, but after that, they kind of disperse, and so it decentralizes pretty well that way. As we look at the machine, which is the political party, they each have a national party, and those national parties consist of four basic elements. We begin here with the National Convention. The National Convention is the gathering of all the party members across the nation that want to attend. They generally have a large showing for these, but a lot of Americans never show up to the National Convention. It happens every 4 years during an election year. And their main goal is to nominate the candidates for president and for vice president. So they will do that during the National Convention, but they will also work toward establishing a party platform. I've got a couple of videos here I can't show you right now, but they will show up on the Canvas page. So at the National Convention, they will establish that party platform that is their statement of position and belief, and it also gives an opportunity for them to showcase their new and rising stars in the political party. And oftentimes they will use this as a way to try to get name recognition for people they want to put on the ticket or on the election coming down the road in 2 or 4 years. They did this with Senator Obama back in 2004, thinking that he might be a good candidate in 2008, and it turns out that he was, and so he was a prominent figure there. Then we also have the national chairman. I should go back to the committee. I didn't talk about them. The National Committee is the group that works on organizing the convention. And they're supposed to have a few more powers that they can do within the party, but they rarely do or rarely exercise them. So their primary focus is working for 3 years to get the National Convention organized and put together, including lining up all of the facilities that they need for that. So they have a pretty big role that they need to play, but you really only hear 4 years or so. Then there's the national chairman. The national chairman is the leader of the National Committee. He gets elected to a 4-year term. Many times this national chairman is actually appointed by the presidential candidate and then it's voted on by other members. So in essence, the president's going to pick this person, but it goes through a formal election process. And if the presidential candidate nominates him, they're all going to throw their support behind him. His primary responsibility is to oversee the headquarters, wherever that may be, if it's in Washington, D.C., or if it's in another city, and then strengthening the party's leadership and getting the party well organized. And that is his primary focus and role. There are congressional campaign committees. This is part of Congress, and their work is to protect the incumbent. You need to know this term, incumbent. It's spelled I-N-C-U-M-B-E-N-T. The incumbent is the person who is currently holding office. So once you get elected to an office, whether it's the presidency or Congress, you immediately start thinking about, how do I get reelected? And there is a congressional campaign committee that is assigned to you to begin working on that reelection opportunity. And so they are typically chosen and directed by the members of Congress, and so you have that method there to assist you in working on your reelection. That way you can focus on governing and you can focus on what you need to do in Washington and not have to worry about reelection until it comes around to your year of reelection. They've already set in motion many of the things to get ready for that. On the state and local level, typically these are locally controlled, so the state controls their own political party. The even more local will control their own and set their own agenda. But they do watch what the national party is doing there. And so there's typically some divisions that happen here with the cities that can be subdivided into wards. This helps for the people to more clearly identify where they're grouped within a city. And so the voters are able to see what groups of people are participating along with them in the party. And then the voters here, the voters themselves and their addresses are organized into precincts, and they share a polling station. Many cities and states have changed the way that they divide up their precincts. It used to be that you had to go vote in your precinct based off of your living address. I know the city of Lafayette has changed that to where you now just have to vote in Lafayette or in your county. So you don't have to vote in your precinct any longer. As long as you're still in the same county, then you are fine. You can go vote anywhere there. But there are a few local elections that affect specifically that precinct. You may be voting on a city councilman, or you may be voting on a mayor. So that's why it's a good idea to vote in your precinct, but not required here. As we look ahead at the future of the political party system, a lot of people believe that there is a decline in the party system here due to the fact that since 1960, the number of voters that have come out has declined more and more since the 1960s. Now, more recently in the 2008, 2012, and 2016 elections, we've seen a little bit more of a resurgence of people coming back to vote, which is a really good thing. But unfortunately, there are a vast number of Americans that choose not to participate in the voting process, or they only vote in a presidential election year. And we have to remember that there are a lot more people who get elected besides just the president. And often it's those other people that get elected that are making the laws that affect you and I much more heavily than the presidential decisions that are being made. There are a lot more independent voters. I think I mentioned this in class, but we see more and more individuals who are claiming to be independent rather than focusing in on one party or another. And so these independents are the ones that voters have to fight over for their votes, trying to sway them one direction or another. That can be a really good thing because it makes the candidates work hard for their vote, but it can also be a really negative thing in which it causes these people to cater to what they think the voters want, and they may flip-flop on their opinion or may become very vanilla in the way that they are campaigning, and then once they get into office, then they show their true colors. We also see a lot of split voters. Split voters are people who split their vote between the parties. So they may vote for president as a Republican, but they vote for their congressman as a Democrat. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we are seeing that as a bigger trend, probably because we see more independent voters. And so you have the decision to make as far as how you want to vote. And when you go to the polls, you can either vote straight Republican, straight Democrat, or you can choose to pick and choose. That is entirely up to you, and that is part of the democratic process. We have a very open, some states have an open political process. In an open primary, it allows for independents to vote, and you do not have to declare a party. You just show up, you vote. Other states have what is called a closed process, in which you have to declare a political party before they allow you to vote in a primary. That only affects the primary. That is not affecting the general election in November. A lot of political parties are changing their campaign strategy. They're using new technology. They are focusing on new issues. They are utilizing social media much more frequently, and they are paying for those ads. So on those new apps that you're buying or on your free social media accounts, you will see more ads for the campaigns that are coming up in the near future. We also see a lot of influence from interest groups. These are groups of people that are not associated with a party, but they will put money into a party in exchange for something in return. If that candidate gets elected that they have supported through the campaign, then they're going to expect that during that candidate's time in office, they're going to see some return on that investment. Now, not monetarily, but they're going to see legislation or laws or enforcement of laws to favor their company or to favor their group. So special interests, they can be from a major corporation. It could be from an industry like the auto workers industry, or it could even be from a group that is maybe one of these third parties. It could be like the Right to Life organization that is very pro-life. And if they put a lot of money into a candidate, they might expect to see something to help their cause.